Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Welcome. I'm glad you all made it after the excitement of last night's football. We're just going to give a few minutes for some other people to join us. You can see the number of participants rising quite quickly now, which is great. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day this afternoon. I'm sure you're all very busy getting ready for the business travel restart. So it's really great that you've managed to come along. We've got some great content for you today, some great experts. So I'm just going to give it a few more minutes before we begin. Just run through some housekeeping rules while we're waiting, actually. So you as attendees are all muted throughout the session, but we are welcoming questions. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A facility. The chat facility is disabled, so I'm afraid you can't chat amongst yourselves, but please feel free to post any questions you have for any of our experts today. The session is also being recorded, so for any of you who want to share them with colleagues later or to catch up and listen to it all again, then please do. Just having a look more. I think we'll probably get started actually. So so welcome officially to our discussion today. We've decided to do this session because I'm sure you'll agree that as we emerge from the pandemic, the way that we travel for business has changed in many ways, with social distancing, remote working, and our offices becoming places to meet rather than to work. This has really given a chance for the private car to make a comeback. It seems that taxis, chauffeur drives, rental cars are now ticking more boxes as we emerge from the COVID lockdowns. So we are going to be talking today about the more important role that ground transport is going to be playing. We'll be looking at what demand will be like as we come out of the lockdowns, looking at whether how supply will meet that demand, and also looking at how travellers and travel buyers, what they want from their ground transport providers and from their programmes. So I have, as I said, an excellent panel of experts today, and I'll just introduce you to them. I think you can see their faces on the screen there. We have Dr. Mike Galvin, who is a consultant with over 40 years expertise in the ground transport industry, having served as CEO of Comcap. We have Josh Collier, who has 13 years of experience, and he's currently the head of proposition for rail and ground transportation for Capita Travel and Events. We have Daniel Price, who has more than 20 years experience in car rental and taxi aggregation. Doesn't actually look old enough for that, but apparently he has. And he's worked with companies including Sixt, Avis, Cabfind, and he has most recently founded Journey, which brings all ground transport into a single platform. And I'll be hearing more about that later on. We also have Dorian Toussaint, who is the founder of Tuska, a ground transport aggregator connecting global travel bookers to African ground transport operators. I'm sure you can see I'm reading this because there's so many of them. I hope you don't mind me reading this as we go along. And I also have Sumit Gupta, whose background spans 18 years in the leisure and corporate travel sectors across sales, and he currently heads up Blue Cube Travel's client and supplier management. We're almost to the end. We've got Gregor Rode, who joins us from SAP Concur, where he oversees strategic product management for car rental and ground transport. And finally, we have Thomas Zeher, who's spent over 25 years in mobility, most of which with Avis Budget Group. He develops mobility services across Europe, North America rather, and Asia. So I don't know if you've been adding up the maths there, but I reckon between them, they've probably got nearly 150 years of expertise in the sector. So let's see them. Let's have a turn on your cameras, gentlemen, and we can all see your faces. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today, and welcome again to everybody who's listening in. So to start off, we want to talk about the topic of demand. When will it return? What will cause it to come back? Let's start with one of our TMC guys. Let's start with you, Josh. Give us an overview.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Bev. I think recovery on the sort of whole has been slow, but definitely the last couple of months we're in a position where we're starting to see green shoots now. albeit that's traditionally sort of domestic travel led with the amount of restrictions that we've got in place. We're in a position where we're starting to understand from our customers, actually, what are they starting to feel about returning to travel. And we're getting some really positive sort of signs as to what that looks like. In a recent survey we did, over 46% of customers expect to travel from July. So actually that's really positive. We will start to see that pent-up demand, I expect, certainly from sort of July and August into September, where we hope is the start of things to come, hopefully. Some interesting trends that are starting to sort of happen as well. We're definitely seeing significantly more bookings sort of coming through our offline channels rather than online, which is quite interesting. I think that reason primarily for that is people, of course, wanting to know restrictions and what their trip may look like. A lot of these people simply wouldn't have travelled since March 2020. I think what will cause that comeback, I think it's that need to reconnect with suppliers, with customers, with internal staff. And actually, while sort of global outlooks point to about a 30% reduction in travel overall, many people recognise the importance of business travel in terms of the economy and getting deals done. And you simply can't do that by virtual channels. So business travel is I think fairly well placed, and ground transport is as well.
Excellent. Well, listen, let's go to our other TMC representatives. Sumi, are you seeing the same?
Yes, we are. We believe that many people are not going to feel safe going back to crowded trains. We are already seeing a pickup in self-drive car bookings where travelers feel safe, especially due to car rental companies putting measures in place for hygiene. But some of our customers, which hardly use taxis and self-drive cars, are looking to have corporate deals for ground transportation now.
And what about you, Mike? Your consultancy works closely with many private hire and ride hail companies. What are you seeing in terms of the business travel demand returning?
We're seeing things move up from a very low base, a very slow rate. To be honest, there's been obviously a cliff edge as far as demand for taxi and private hire services are concerned across the country, and the outcome of that has been that drivers have retired early, found other jobs delivering groceries and things, getting into the delivery business, because there's been no evening or night work, no airports, which is a big part of the average taxi and private hire driver's day, very little rail work. Just this week, actually, the Department for Transport gave out some statistics. Vehicles are generally licensed annually and drivers are normally licensed on a 3-year cycle. And during 2001, there was a 16% drop off in licensed vehicles and 6% in drivers. I think that's actually speeded up during the rest of 2001. So there's going to be definitely a considerable fall off in supply. At the moment, the demand isn't going to support the supply anyway, so it's not a big problem. But going forward, I think that could cause a few bumps in the road. The other thing is that within the taxi and private hire industry, we're starting to see inflationary pressures, particularly on fuel, and that is going to start to feed through, I think, to probably higher fares at some point as well. So there's quite a lot of change. I mean, the one thing I would say about the figures of vehicles and drivers is at the end of 2000, it was at an historic high. Ride hailing had come to the UK and things have been very buoyant. So it was at a historic high. So there was always going to be room for a correction. But I think we're going to see a gentle slide down for some time to come.
Okay, so that's a picture in the UK. What about in South Africa, Dorian? Is it a similar situation there?
Hi, Bev. No, unfortunately not. We're into our third wave. We're on a level 4 lockdown. we're also one of the restricted countries in terms of travel. So there has been a slight return to travel in South Africa, but it's all predominantly domestic. We've seen a bit of an uptake from the US market predominantly, but it's marginal what's coming through. And again, now with this level 4 lockdown, we can't go into provincial. A lot of hotels have closed.
Sorry, John, we can't quite hear you there.
And hospitality venues are also closed. So the market is very depressed from that perspective. And
I think
our vaccinations are also very slow. So there we go. I'm back.
Okay, go back.
So yeah, so it looks like it's good.
I think we're having some technical problems with Dorian now over in South Africa. So we'll come. We'll try and come back to you shortly.
Looks like it's going to be a very slow recovery, and we're only looking.
Oh, he's gone on to mute now. So I'm sorry, I'm sorry you couldn't quite hear that. Well, maybe we'll come back to that later. I'm sure he has some fascinating things to say. We've covered demand now. What about supply? Let's ask Thomas maybe. What do you expect to see in the car rental sector in terms of how the supply can meet the demand?
Well, obviously, the level of cars in fleet was brought down dramatically because there was almost no demand. And we can see the demand is picking up in the industry, also driven by the US, where the domestic market is also coming back. But, predicting now that the demand, the midterm demand to purchase the right level of cars for the right location, it's extremely difficult because there are no historical data of an event like this. There are just no precedents. So there were a lot of crises in the travel industry over the last decades. SARS, mad cow disease, financial crisis, volcanoes erupted, but it was more temporary. So you could come back to business relatively easy. So this one is new. There are still uncertainties about restrictions in some parts of the world, which doesn't make it easier to predict demand. Open, close, open, and close again. And then how strong will the B2B and the leisure market come back? Well, leisure market is driven by restrictions, obviously, but the B2B market, we just don't know. I think just said it looks really good that 47% bookings are coming back, but you just don't know, because if you buy fleet, you cannot do this from today to tomorrow. You need a couple of weeks lead time. And this is very difficult and will need time to adjust itself. I think the impact on the changes of behavior of travelers needs also to be seen. What does it mean for car rental? So overall, it will level itself out, but the best advice at the moment is, I think, for buyers to really stay in frequent contact with their suppliers and to give them really an honest view how they see their own business travel coming back. So this will definitely help the supplier to make some predictions of the B2B demand.
Okay, and Mike, is it a similar situation in the world of taxis?
Yeah, demand is very flat. It's affected very much by the latest government news. If the news is good, the demand, the 1% and 2% turn into 3% and 4%. If there's a week where the news is not so good, it'll drop down a bit. There's certainly a trend of very slow increase in demand, and at the moment supply can meet it, but I think it's going to get interesting. I think if we get to a situation where restrictions start to be removed, people start to go back to the office, if they start, business travel starts to happen again, any decent volumes, then I think supply perhaps is going to be, that's going to be the problem. At the moment, demand's the problem. It could shift to supply quite quickly. And as I said earlier, I think price is going to become an issue. And it's going to become an issue for a number of reasons, apart from the increase in the cost of petrol. Taxi and private hire in most of the cities are being asked to move to electric vehicles, which is a good thing. Everybody kind of supports it. But when you've got a situation where businesses over the last month have eaten up all their cash, and now they've got to lay out lots of cash to invest in electric vehicles, which have got a high entry point. I mean, obviously the costs reduce over the life of the vehicle, but the kind of cash flow impact, yeah, it's quite a difficult situation. It's going to be difficult for some time.
Definitely, I think we could do a whole different webinar, a whole new webinar on the whole situation with electric vehicles and the sustainability aspect. So, so it's coming back. The demand's coming back. What do you think, experts? What do you think travellers and travel buyers want from their programme as it comes back? Let's go over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Bev. So I think it's really interesting that I think travellers, their want and needs have changed. So we did some research prior to the pandemic, and what you would find out from them there is that getting where they want to go on time was the most important thing. It was very, very high on the agenda. Actually different from a business traveller to a leisure traveller. Leisure travellers want to be picked up on time. So there's two very discrete differences. Now, the top of all the charts is safety. You know, the most important thing for them now is a safe environment for them to travel in. The research we've done currently points to 3 trends within the travel environment on the ground. Safety is one of the most important things. Mike mentioned it just then, sustainability. It's grown on everyone's agenda. You know, we all, saw all the pictures on LinkedIn of clear skies above some cities once we weren't traveling so much. And sustainability now is a really, at the forefront, and it's going to be definitely a challenge for the private hire firms, less so in the big cities, the Londons of the world, but when you come to the more smaller cities where the infrastructure isn't in place, that's going to be a challenge to meet the demands that the traveller wants now. And then the third thing is connectivity. The interesting part that, and one of the reasons why I founded Journey, is that only 3% of all bookings from a travel management company are ground transport. And that's a frightening fact, because the TMC looks after air, rail, they look after hotels, a lot of car hire. But when you come down to the taxi journeys and other types of transport, where are these journeys going, and how are they being booked? How are they being monitored? Who knows who's booking what and where? Because we all certainly don't live at the airport or at the train station. So these bookings are going somewhere. What we find is that our research shows that over 50% of buyers see ground transport important when they're choosing their next TMC. So we can see that this is starting to become a real factor when they're making journeys. One of the key things I see happening is private car journeys have increased over the past 18 months as people look for that safer environment. So I think that's going to carry on for the short term and kind of substitute for longer legged rail journeys. But that creates a challenge in itself around safety, what part it has within the travel program. There's lots of questions on the private car and how it fits within a travel program. And then the final point, I think, is this hybrid office. Bev, you mentioned in your introduction, people working from home and occasionally going into the office. If people now work from home and the office is no longer their permanent place of work, the private car might be a business trip, and therefore there's all kinds of regulations that need to be looked at to make sure that the user is safe within that journey, because, well, it's now a business trip.
Excellent, thank you for that. So from an OBT viewpoint, Gregor, what do you think that travellers are looking for in the booking process?
Yeah, in former days, transport on the ground mostly meant to rent a car or book a limousine service. Today, travelers are increasingly interested in, so to say, modern alternatives to that, such as ride-hailing, for example. And of course, ride-hailing is already connected in all of our minds with a mobile device. So you are not interested to book such long time prior to your trip, but instead you want to have your ride-hailing, for example, or car sharing at the moment when you arrive at your destination and you want to go further when you have the demand for transport. So it also needs, from the perspective of an OBT, to be included into into the mobile part of the OBT. So this concerns ride-hailing in particular, but can also be applied to car sharing or, for example, public transport.
Okay, and Thomas, let's go back to you. What do you think buyers want from their ground transport providers? Oh, Thomas, I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
We got.
No, I'm not.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Okay, that was yeah. From a buyer's perspective, I think that they just want to understand if the supplier can really meet the demand and make the contracts and adhere to the contracts that they are doing. I think from a traveler point of view, I see it's very interesting. People I'm talking with, they are definitely about health, safety, hygiene and everything. But what I hear more and more is, you know what, I know exactly what the supplier is doing on my domestic market with all these things. But there's a little bit of uncertainty when international business travel starts. Ooh, how is my company looking to make sure the supplier they have chosen in wherever I go is following the same regime than in my domestic market? So I think that's a concern. That was what traveler really want, is to have this not only in the domestic market, the safety net of hygiene, but also when they're traveling abroad. I thought it was very interesting what I heard there.
Yeah, so I know, Daniel, you touched on safety as well, but do you want to talk a bit more about that? It's such an important aspect now as we come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, so from a safety point of view, our recent research suggested that 80% of companies have a ground transport program for car hire. So obviously high volume, use lots of spend, so they'll have a vehicle rental program and an approved supply chain. What we tend to find is that less than 50%, probably less than 30% actually have a taxi program or a private hire, that ground transport key element, which means that, as we inferred earlier, with only 3% going through the TMC, even outside of the TMC, they don't really have direct relationships in place either. What that leaves is, it really leaves for the end user, the passenger, to make a transaction and a procurement decision outside of policy on their own when in a foreign city, landing in a place where they've perhaps never been before. We know in places like London, TfL work very hard to make sure that the vehicles are all insured, and if you book them correctly, you are insured. You know, I'm sure Dorian could talk about what happens in other countries, because you know the restrictions might not be as strong. However, the challenge that you really have is that if you're traveling and you're not making that decision for that booking with a vetted and audited supply chain that either your travel management company or your company have approved, then you're at much more risk. You're less safe when you travel in this way. So to give you an example, if my wife was traveling on business and she landed in a foreign city, let's say she went to Paris, and she jumped in a car that she chose to jump into, and her company didn't know she was traveling, and they didn't know which supplier she'd use to make that journey, and then we never heard from my wife again, right? And we're talking real edge cases here, but if you don't know where to start, you don't know how that journey could have been improved. So who's responsible for that, right? Is it my wife? Is it the company? Is it the travel management company? Probably not, because they weren't involved in it. So you have this whole scenario where people are potentially at their most vulnerable, yet it is the least focused part of the travel journey. And I think from a safety point of view, and when we talk about what travelers want, this is the bit that I see being really important for them, is pulling that safety piece, that connectivity into their booking via their travel management company. Previous research I'd seen said that 1 in 3 business travelers have said they felt in an unsafe experience in ground transport. And you can kind of understand why. It's the only time during a journey that we're asking our business travelers to get into a vehicle with a stranger. And therefore, you know, we need to do everything we can to make sure that is the most seamless and safe part of the trip. However, companies are changing. And as I mentioned earlier, over 50% of travel buyers now are really looking to make sure that ground transport forms a key part of their decision-making process in the future. So I see this as being a trend within booking for 2 reasons. We're doing it more, so we're expecting to travel on the ground more for the next year or 2 at least. And the second thing is this is what travelers are telling the travel buyer that they want.
So it seems that perhaps the TMC booking experience is a bit less connected than the travellers want. So and that's leaving safety gaps. What do you think TMCs can do more here? Let's go to Josh.
I think that's probably a two-part question, Bev. So I'll start with the safety aspects, because you're right. Ultimately, safety is a key priority. It always has been. It will continue to be. And I think sort of previously, there was an element of the travel manager almost knowing that they needed to do something around something like taxis, and having something in place, but relatively it made up such a small percentage that they were much more focused on airlines. They're much more focused on the hotel deals, for instance. So it was a case of it's not broken. I'm not going to fix it almost. The pandemic has definitely changed that. There is, as Daniel mentioned with his research, I wasn't too surprised to sort of hear about those results, because I think, safety is so much important. It's so important and will continue to be so even after the pandemic. The pandemic has probably just accelerated people's thinking a little bit more. How the TMCs can support that. A lot of TMCs actually audit their supply chain. So that as part of the sort of process of choosing a supplier, they expect that supplier to have everything in place. They expect not just information about the sort of drivers, but actually the vehicles, and also even right down to companies' policies. How many people can, how long can drivers work, without taking a break? What's been really sort of apparent and what's grown for us over the course of the pandemic is the sheer sort of volume of customers that are now beginning to talk about ground transport. Whereas before it was, you may see it in one bid out of every four. It's very much a case of in every single bid now. And going back to sort of our taxi sort of program, we've actually onboarded more than double the amount of customers that we had on that previously, which again goes some way to sort of stacking up those stats. The elements around the connectivity and recognise that. Previously, TMCs have been very reliant on GDSs historically to power their solutions. And that's, the GDS is great in many aspects. Actually, it's not very good for car rental. It's not very good for ground transport. And actually that's led to a lot of direct agreements, certainly with car rental providers, because actually the TMCs were almost ill-equipped to sort of handle certain aspects of the journey. Now that the OBT is becoming a lot more commonplace, and there's companies like SAP Concur, there's mobility platforms like what Daniel has as well. Actually, that content is a lot richer. That functionality is a lot richer, and it really has accelerated the user experience of the booking journey, and that's really important. So although safety is important, actually making it easy for people to book is important as well, to ultimately go hand in hand.
Oh, thanks, Josh. That's a great picture of what's happening in Europe. Let's try and get back to you, Doreen. I know we had some problems earlier with your being able to hear you, but tell us again whether that translates to what's happening in South Africa.
Thanks, Bev. Yeah, I'm having some internet problems, so please excuse me if we go down. It's not quite the same in South Africa. Unfortunately, a lot of the first world countries, and we're a mix of both, seem to think that we are governed and managed in the same way that Europe and America is. And while we have a lot of regulations, the problem is administering them. So we have a lot of regulations that are just not upheld, and then they're just not administered. Where you are applying the same principles sorry.
I think we're losing you again.
I'm not sure. If we're applying the same principles, yeah. Damn it.
let's try again. Like, we'll come back to you again later. It's such a shame, 'cause I'm sure you've got fascinating things to share with us. What about from the OBT's point of view with regards to traveller safety? Greggy, would you like to talk away?
Sure. When it comes to traveller safety, the OBT has the data and provides control to travel managers. This means, as a travel manager, before the trip even starts, you're enabled to set up rules with inclusion of your company's safety plan. And as soon as the travelers on their way, the OBT has the data too. I mean, we all remember the volcano in Iceland in 2010. In such a situation, the OBT knows where the travelers are and can provide information in a secure way to travelers' companies. So having an OBT is, for me, the base for traveler safety.
Well, I'm sure we could have a whole different again webinar on the whole safety aspect. There's been a lot of great points with the panelists today. I think we've lost Dorian again, which is a shame. We're shame we couldn't hear what he had to say, but
no, I am back, Bev, and I turned off my camera, so hopefully
he's there. Here he is.
Better. Seems to be a bit more stable.
Okay, so Dorian, let's go back to you then.
Thanks.
From South Africa.
Yeah, thanks very much, and sorry to everybody for that, for some of the joys. So as I was saying, you know, the same principles that Europe and America and the first world countries are applying seem to apply to South Africa, or the travel bookers seem to apply that same principle here, and that's not necessarily the case, where it becomes even more important to know who your ground transport provider is and to have a relationship with those providers to ensure that they're meeting the standards that you expect from a first world environment. And it's not to say we don't have, really important that the relationships are in place.
I think this is a prime example of why we need to meet face to face. We need to keep
I'm not
meeting.
sure if you got all that.
Dorian, you're breaking up again, I'm afraid. I think maybe he's gone. So so as we've been talking, we've had a few questions in already, but please feel free, those of you who are listening, to post any questions that you might have for any of our experts here today. I think we have got, let's have a look. I think this is probably one for you, Daniel. We talked about, we've had an increase in private car usage for business travel. Talk to us more about the implications of that for travel managers and corporate travel buyers. Obviously
it's a really good question, and I think we've touched on many topics that you could open up whole webinars on, and this is probably one, because this is where kind of fleet and travel kind of cross over. So if you think of the scenario where you went to work every day in the same place, and you had a regular season ticket for your train, and it cost you however much a year, and you just jumped on the train and didn't think twice. Problem now is you might be doing it once a week or twice a month, and even going forward, the company may have closed half of the office and removed your desk and said you just come in when you want to. If you're now officially a home worker and you're home based, the question now lies is, are those journeys now a commute, or are they a business trip? Are they now something entirely different? And in the UK, and I can't talk to other countries, but in the UK, if you're using a personal car for business, which those trips now may or may not be, the company is as liable for that journey as the person driving the car. And that means that a company needs to take some kind of provisions in place to make sure that the driver has a license, that the driver has insurance that allows them to make the journey for a business trip, not just for a commute or a domestic. And they also need to make sure that the vehicle has a license, an MOT in the UK. And these three things, while small things that we all do for our own vehicles on a regular basis, if we're not doing them, or for whatever reason our photo card expires, and we have an accident, that's a business trip that you've had an accident on. And there are so many implications. And you talk to businesses, and I would believe that many travel managers wouldn't be aware of this. My thoughts are that the travel buyers and the TMCs have amazing supply chains in place for business trips of hundreds or thousands of miles. You know, if you want to go fly anywhere, they will make sure there's a flight available, a hotel. But the challenge is the local journeys, those sub 50 or 30-mile journeys in the local area where the supply chain isn't a big corporate that you can engage with. It's a much smaller business, perhaps a mom and pop taxi business that will, instead of taking a £5,000 a year rail ticket, you're taking every other day a £30 taxi journey, or you're taking your private car. So I think these have really big implications, really big challenges. And I think the reason why these haven't come to the forefront yet, Bev, is because we're not yet doing it. This isn't yet the new reality. We're all still kind of working from home, attending the office occasionally. But when the new normal, the hybrid office becomes the new normal, I believe these are the conversations that will be happening between HR departments, fleet departments, and the travel department. And my tip for the next 5 to 10 years is that the travel buying department and the fleet buying department will just become the mobility department. It will all merge into one. You won't have a travel buyer, you'll have a mobility buyer, and they'll do all of the purchasing. And users may not have a mobility, a company car budget. You might have a mobility budget that says I can use X amount on train and I can use a scooter if I want, or a taxi. I think this is coming. The infrastructure isn't there yet, but we will get there. So there's huge implications on private car usage within business travel.
Now you're on mute.
I know, I'm on mute. Would anyone, only because my dog started barking. What has anyone else like to add anything to that? Talking about the implications. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to go back a couple of points actually. About I think it was Joshua was talking about connecting with ground transport, and I think what we have seen over recent years is a complete change in the whole area of taxis and private hire. Because if we went back, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, something like that, companies were very local. Taxi and private hire were local. You know, you went to the station, there was a local company, they took you locally. Trying to, you know, for any of the travel companies to try and book a taxi or private hire in Scotland or in Berlin or, you know, Japan was mission impossible. And I think that what has happened is technology has enabled it. Companies like the one that Daniel used to work for and so on, they've enabled all this so that the companies are starting to be connected up. Companies are starting to work in networks. And then I think, why is demand for ground transport so low through travel companies? I think what has happened over the last 5 or 10 years, and love them or hate them, people seem to be in equal measure. There are various brands now that straddle, you know, 35, 40 countries, perhaps more. And so if you use that app locally and enjoy using it, and it's a great service, naturally, if you go to another country, you just think, well, I'll just use that. It's the same everywhere. And to an extent, the technical experience might well be, the payment systems might well be. What of course will change is the different regulatory environments and you know, level of safety and so on in certain parts of the world. But I think they're the two big changes, kind of development technology and the development networks. And then, you know, these big and often trusted brands across multiple territories. And I think probably as time moves on, there'll be more demand for ground transport for older generation travelers, because lots of us like to get off the plane and see the man or lady with a board there and whisk us off to our hotel or meeting or whatever. Whereas perhaps younger business travelers can't be bothered with all the paraphernalia of that, and they'd much rather just use their app and take their chances when they get there, and they're less perhaps concerned with safety and more with doing abroad what they do at home. So I think that's been the big change, really.
Okay, I know, Thomas, you had your hand up earlier. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or to
Mine was more about the private car usage, but I think Joshua wanted to say something in response to Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of echo. I think I completely agree with what Mike has just said. Really, what has really accelerated ground transport usage, I think, is the likes of companies like Uber, for instance, that have their technology approach. Not only has it benefited their customers, but actually a lot of the market has responded by offering their own similar solutions, and even local taxi companies, dispatch companies to sort of make that journey seamless in terms of a tracking experience as well. So all things like that, definitely have made life easier.
Josh, a number of the companies I've spoken to in the past and recently have a certain level of either discomfort or not sure about putting Uber on their travel program. Obviously, they've had well-storied run-ins with TfL and many other licensing authorities globally. How do you think it fits within a travel program? Because obviously you're providing what your customers want and what the travelers want via your platform.
No, it's a really good question. I think my view, and this was my view sort of prior to the pandemic, but one that is even more common now, is before the sort of pandemic. It's interesting when you ask customers about Uber, and they'd ask you a question about Uber. It's almost they kind of accept the use of it for expenses. They don't really want to sign up to an Uber for Business account, for instance, for reasons that you've just outlined. Because of that.
So it's accepted within programs as long as it's not part of the program. So we'll receipt it basically.
Yeah. If it goes for expenses, nobody's really going to bat an eyelid. People aren't going to sign up for an Uber for Business account due to the reasons.
I think a lot of companies can also see, depending on the industry where they're working in, right? But for consulting companies and others, if they hire people, young educated people, university people, they demand this from an employer, that they have the flexibility to move around how their generation is used to. And I think, yes, they may not officially sign an Uber account, right? But that's the reason why they accept it on the expense process, because they may have problems to find the right people to hire.
I wish Dorian was here actually, because it would give us a different view from an international point of view, because obviously we have a different viewpoint in the UK for what is regulatory and what gets signed off by the licensing authority, whereas I think for an international viewpoint it might be a bit different.
Just quickly, I am here and I'm listening in, but it certainly is different, and before I get cut off by the network, we're experiencing very different challenges to yourselves, particularly around regulation, and particularly around management thereof. The corporate.
It seems that poor Dorian gets 2
I
sentences.
want to apply the same. There it goes. No.
Goes again.
No.
Well,
I'll give it a miss. You guys carry on.
It's such a shame, Dorian. I'm sorry we're having these problems. We have to do this again and make sure that when you fly over to the UK, maybe we'll do this again. So one of the things we haven't touched that much on.
For sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the car rental, the trends, any changes we're seeing there? Does anyone want to talk about the car rental sector? We've talked quite a lot about taxis and ride hailing. Has anyone got anything they'd like to discuss from the car rental side?
From the car rental side, I think what we said at the moment, the companies do the best to really accommodate the demand for hygiene and to clean the cars, and they have really, all of what I have seen, all have protocols, very strict protocols in place, which are also used in all different markets. So it doesn't only work in the UK, it would work in South Africa the same. I think the only thing what buyers have to keep in mind when they are negotiating with car rental companies in the future is some things have changed. obviously operating costs with hygiene a little bit, but also staff costs. But the main problem of car rental companies in the foreseeable future is the fleet procurement. Because I think the risk profile of a lot of companies in this sector have changed. So they may have higher costs to finance the purchase. Then, you know, a lot of them working with car dealers to churn the buyback cars. So are these car dealers still there? Did they survive? Or are they still able financially to churn the same amount of cars? Or all of a sudden you have now issue that, oh yeah, the OEM would sell you cars, but you have nobody to get it through. And OEMs obviously also start to yield their business. They had also a rough time. And the more desperate almost you need a product, obviously you come in a weaker situation to negotiate deals with the OEMs. So I think buyers have to understand the operating costs, what a customer can see. Obviously they're higher because you do more for the hygiene. But when they negotiate with car rental companies, they should keep in mind that there's a real cost increase and uncertainty on the procurement side as well. So and I think it's not, every customer is very important, even if the volume was twice as high before the pandemic. Nobody will penalize a customer because he has less volume due to he lost half of his revenues or half of his staff. But I think the next round of negotiation, buyers should know that on the supplier side, fundamental things have changed, which they have to cope with. So there might be a little bit less flexibility to say yes to something, because they really have to make sure they drive a sustainable business. So if everybody wants that the health and safety and the environmental impact obviously is kept up high in the car rental industry, that's a cost increase, but also the procurement side for really the foreseeable future will be under pressure as well. I think just want to make sure when the buyer and the car rental company sit together that they really talk about what's going on and find a sensitive, mutual, agreed way forward.
Thomas, when I joined car rental nearly 20 years ago in my little car rental office at Enterprise in Birmingham, and spent most of my time cleaning cars and delivering them, we'd sold an Astra so a Ford Focus or something like this, for about £200 a week, right? I think I could probably get the same deal today, right? 20 years later. Yeah, the pricing hasn't really changed. And I don't recall pricing changing in the 20 years I was there, but we certainly have had huge increases in the cost of the vehicles due to the technology and everything else. So if pricing isn't going up directly to the customer, and now we have a smaller fleet and demand is patchy, we're going to have to start seeing price increases, at least in the vehicle rental space, if not in taxi, right?
Yes, I would. I don't think I have to be a big oracle to predict this, because it's just and before the pandemic, you know, you had ways how you could really through improvements in efficiency or the process, you could take costs out, right, and could mitigate some of the price increases, not all of them. But today there are too many elements which are now adding to the uncertainty, and especially financing costs, or if an OEM is telling you, well, it's nice that you want to have X amount of cars, I only give you half of it. This is new, right? And will add to the costs, and there's just no way you can mitigate this. So at the end, you have to give it to the customer. You have to pass it through. And I think in the before the pandemic, a lot of suppliers just didn't do it because they were afraid to lose the volume. I think that has changed. I think now the companies have to see that when they really rent a car, they have to make a sustainable business out of it, because there is no way you find other ways to be more efficient or to take cost out of the business now after the pandemic. So yes, I think car rental prices will rather be higher than lower than before the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the the pressures that we're seeing in car rental on pricing will flow through to clients. Like you said earlier, it won't happen immediately because they want to win the clients back. They want them back in the cars and back traveling. Josh, I know you did a big chunk on car hire kind of over the last 12 months. Any of this feel about right for you? Is this what you're seeing?
I think, yeah, that I wouldn't just put myself in this sort of bracket here. I think that the sort of TMC industry is probably waiting with bated breath a little bit just to kind of find out. And we're starting to see in the US demand issues. And pricing is, in some key cities, I think I saw in America, was that 300% increase for a standard car for a weekend in Florida. So there's absolutely no doubt that that's kind of going to come over here as well. We just don't know what the impact of that will really be at the minute. But definitely with some of the providers, all of the providers have downscaled, but certainly others have cut back on their services as well. Probably there's actually only really, from a big company perspective, only probably 2 or 3 companies from a car rental perspective that'll do delivery and collection in the UK, which is actually probably certainly for me, and Summit can maybe come in here as well, but for his company is probably the vast majority of what we do.
Thanks for that, Josh. I was just going to throw one last question out to all the panelists. So if you were to give one piece of advice to a travel buyer now looking at their ground transport program, what would it be? Who wants to start? Mike, would you like to share?
Well, I think my advice would be that don't go around looking for cheap deals. I think as volumes have decreased, I think as demand for quality and demand for sustainable solutions, greener solutions and so on, are coming to the fore. I think that people should be expecting to pay a little more. Keep close to your supplier, and they'll do their best, but don't be surprised if costs start to move up.
Okay, and Sumit, do you have any advice for?
Absolutely, I agree with Mike as well. We were talking about the technology earlier. So in my view, all these platforms states that they are tech platform, which means there's no vetting of the drivers. For example, there are over 140,000 Uber drivers alone in London. So my personal viewpoint is it's everyone's responsibility to consider safety of travelers and not focus on cost-saving exercise only.
Definitely. And Josh, one last word of advice?
Mine would be talk to the TMC. Chances are they've probably invested a bit of time and money into their solutions over the course of the past 18 months. I know we certainly have in my business to meet that demand. So yeah, chances are the TMC is better equipped to support them than what they've ever been.
And anyone else like to share their expertise just before we close? Daniel?
Yeah, I think what I do talk to travel buyers who I speak to are, and sorry, Josh and Summit, but my advice to them is to challenge their TMC to deliver the solutions that they need. So there's a long chain involved in getting what they want. You've got the TMC, but then at the back end, you've got the OBT. Sorry, Gregor, I'm bringing you into this as well. You're all on my hit list. And this chain needs to work together in a really succinct fashion to deliver the ground transport program that's needed. And to be perfectly honest, I think all 3 of you would agree, it doesn't do it today. And therefore, there needs to be the demand from the traveler themselves and the travel buyer to enable these to pull the solutions together to deliver these safe, sustainable and connected journeys for them.
Thank you. So thanks very much to all of you, our experts today. And thank you to everybody who's joined us. And we ended on quite a controversial note there from Daniel, but lots to think about. Enjoy the rest of your evenings and enjoy Sunday night when England are out. And Dorian's back. Thanks so much, Dorian. We're so sorry we couldn't hear much of what you were saying, but maybe we can put it in an email and send it to everybody who's who's joined us today. So that would be great. But thank you very much again for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it and can take away some good advice to go back to your businesses with. And take care, and I hope to see you all again in person at some point when we don't have all the technical issues that we've had today. Many thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.